Thank you for joining us today for the Condition Tracking Module Help video. The Condition Tracking Module is used to keep track of the patient's diagnoses and contributing diagnoses, which can indicate the specific location where the diagnosis is occurring, the severity, and if the condition is worsening or improving. Click the Condition Tracking button to access the module. When the module is accessed for the first time, you are prompted to diagnose the patient. It will show you all the diagnoses in your EHR database. Each condition box will indicate if the condition displayed is an ICD-10, ICD-9, or SNOMED code by a character located in the upper right corner. Click on the categories to filter the diagnoses that are attached to specific categories. Enter the search criteria into the search field to find a certain diagnosis. Click the Sort button to sort the diagnoses in ascending or descending order. Select or deselect items to display or not to display. Single-click a diagnosis to move it under the selected diagnosis header. Each selected diagnosis will have fields that can be filled out. Click the red X to remove the diagnosis from the selected list. Click the Contributing checkbox to indicate if the diagnosis is a contributing diagnosis. These diagnoses won't be resolved but contributes to the patient's health. Click the Chronic checkbox if the diagnosis is a chronic condition. Enter the appropriate date in the onset field. Click the Default on Proxy checkbox to force the contributing diagnosis to always show up as a secondary diagnosis. Click the Location Search button to attach a location for the diagnosis. The order in which you select diagnoses is reflected on the Note and Condition Tracking list. When finished adding all the patient's conditions, click the Next button. If the ICD-10 code selected does not exist in your list, it can be added through the Add New from ICD-10. Click the Add New from ICD-10 button. This will bring the user to the complete list of ICD-10 codes. There are two ways to select a code. One is through the code picker or through the search bar. The code picker allows you to filter your ICD-10 codes from the most general to most specific diagnosis. These boxes are your base codes broken up by categories. As you click through, notice that each level becomes more specific. Sometimes when you click on certain codes, the right sidebar will generate some warnings that the provider should look over. These warnings are derived from Medicare to better support the selected code. Continue to click through the picker until your code turns green. If there are choices inside the box, you must indicate the appropriate 7th character before adding this diagnosis to your patient's condition list. Click the area you want to go back to at the top of the picker to go back to a previous selection. Through the search bar, users can search for codes by either code or description. Click on the code to highlight it. Once selected, click OK, and it will add your new ICD-10 code to the selected diagnosis sidebar. Delete the code by clicking the Delete button. Change the order of the DX code by highlighting the appropriate code and using the up and down arrows. After adding a diagnosis to the patient's chart, the system will bring you to the condition tracking screen. The patient's note will pull all the newly added conditions. Click the Show All checkbox to show all active, inactive, or resolved diagnoses. Click the Add button to add a new diagnosis. Click Save to save the information. Click Close to close out of the module. Newly added diagnoses will have a star at the top corner of the box. Each diagnosis will have its own set of buttons and data fields. Click the Expand button to add additional information. Click the Diagnosis Search button to modify the diagnosis. Click the Location List drop-down to indicate the specific diagnosis's location. Click the Location Search button to add a new location. Indicate the condition state as worse, same, or better. Click the Resolve button if the patient's condition has been resolved. The ordering arrow moves the diagnoses up and down the condition list. Click the Additional Information drop-down button to access the Additional Information screen. The Additional Information list will display all the conditions that may be the patient's ailment, but it has not yet been confirmed. These will not be trackable through condition tracking. Click the Add Suggested Diagnosis button to add additional diagnoses to the suggested list. Click the appropriate codes, then save. Click the Add Additional Diagnosis or Add Additional Diagnosis from ICD Tree button to add an additional diagnosis from the EHR database. Search and select the appropriate code, then click Save. Delete an additional diagnosis from the list by highlighting the desired code, then click the Remove Additional Diagnosis button. Add comments in the comment box. Enter the condition's onset date in the onset box. Click the Acute button to indicate if the patient's diagnosis is acute. If the patient's diagnosis is chronic, click the Chronic box. When a diagnosis is marked as chronic, the diagnosis will be indicated with a red button. If there aren't any assessment questions with the diagnosis, the button will be grayed out. Click the Attachment button to add or review any attachments in relation to the diagnosis. Click the Refuse button to indicate if the patient refused treatment for a condition. Then select from a list of refusal codes. Click the Severity drop-down and select the appropriate option, indicating the diagnosis's severity. Changing the severity will reorder the conditions from most severe to least. New diagnoses do not need an indication if the condition is worse, same, or better. Those indications will be tracked on subsequent visits and encounters. Unselect a status by clicking the status again. If the patient's condition has been resolved, click the Resolve button. The contributing diagnosis list will display all the diagnoses in addition to the main one. Click the Default on Procedure checkbox to default the contributing diagnosis on all of the procedures. Click the Inactive checkbox to mark the contributing diagnosis inactive. Click the Chronic checkbox to mark as a chronic condition. Click the Information button to supply the patient with information about the diagnosis. This will connect you to the U.S. National Library of Medicine from the National Institute of Health supplied by Medline Plus. You can print out the information. If you need any additional help or have any further questions, please call the Genius Solutions ehrTHOMAS support line at 586-751-9080. Option 7. Thank you.